Good evening, everyone. I'm Wally Bopkowitz, the Issaquah City Administrator. Thank you for joining us this evening for this review of Mayor Pauly's proposed fiscal year 2021 budget. Would encourage folks at this point to put yourselves on mute if not already done that. That'll make it easier, I think, for everyone. Myself, there we go. Thank you, Adam. And before we get started, I have a presentation. I'd like to ask Mayor Pauly, who's joining us this evening, if she'd like to say a few words. Mayor Pauly, good evening.
Sure. Thank you, Wally. I know this is the first year that we're going out to the community like this, but I did want to thank you. You brought a whole bunch of new ideas that I really like about community engagement. And so this is just a strange year. And I'm sure as we move into next year and beyond, this will become an event where we'll be able to have more people attend and have more questions. So I'm glad that Connie and I missed your name, owner.
Bill.
Bill? Or Phil?
Phil.
Phil. I am glad that Phil and Connie are here because even when I've hosted mayor's coffees before, I can get anywhere from 10 people to just one. And it's still worthwhile just to have a good in-depth conversation with anybody. So thank you both for coming. I believe Wally's going to go through a presentation. I am here until just before 7 p.m. And so we'll see if there's time for questions. If I'm here, I'm happy to help. Otherwise, I'm sure Wally will be able to fill in anything that I miss. So thank you both for coming. And Autumn and Wally, thank you both for hosting.
You bet. And let me introduce Autumn Monahan, the assistant to the city administrator, who is our communications manager and helps with all of this. So Autumn, thank you for being here this evening as well. So I'm going to share my screen. Now, Autumn, can you see what I've got up? Mayor Pauly, can you see what I have up? All right, I can't. I didn't see the picture. Okay,
yes,
you're nodding
we
head.
Can
Great,
see it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Very good, thanks. So what I'm going to do is give an overview of the proposed budget, talk a little bit about the general fund revenue highlights, the general fund being the main funding source for our basic municipal services, expenditure priorities, a little discussion about fund balance or our savings and reserves that we have, other budget highlights, and then also talk about the next steps in the budget process. The budget schedule, we started on September 29th with the mayor transmitting the budget to the city council. Last night on October 6th, we did a budget overview presentation for the city council. So we are now at October 7th, this public outreach meeting. We also had a public outreach meeting back at the end of August prior to the budget being released. We then have a series of public meetings and public hearings planned. The city council decided yesterday that they will spend some time talking about the budget at their next study session on October 13th. We will have the public hearings on the budget on October 19th. I would encourage any members of the public that have comments on the budget to come to the city council on October 19th and participate in the public hearing. The council plans to have budget deliberations on October 27th, plan to adopt the property tax levy, which is done separately from the final budget adoption, and that's planned for November 2nd. The final budget deliberations are planned for November 5th with an additional meeting on November 10th if necessary. And it's the expectation of the administration that the council will consider the budget and ordinances for a final adoption on November the 16th. So to give you just sort of a executive summary, top line summary of the budget, this has been a heck of a year, 2020. I think everyone will agree with that. And certainly the city of Issaquah has had to deal with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have already made significant budget changes earlier in the year in April and May. And so those changes will help us with some flexibility as we move forward in 2021. Certainly be continuing to be fiscally prudent. As you'll see in this presentation, there's still a lot of question marks about our revenues, and so we want to be thoughtful about that. We are also trying to be thoughtful about the use of our reserves or our fund balances. The council previously had decided that there would be no increases in the city-run utility rates. Our water, wastewater, and refuse rates are all remaining the same, the city portions of them in 2020 or 2021. And then at the end of the presentation, I'll talk about specifically some of the funding priorities that Mayor Pauly has included in the budget, dealing with social safety net, public safety and police accountability, parks, and our community planning and development department. So the overall budget for 2021 proposed is $122.6 million. That's about 14.3% less than the proposed, the adopted 2020 budget. This gives you a breakdown. The vast majority of that reduction is on capital projects. Our capital investments sort of ebb and flow depending on the project from year to year. And so the majority of that reduction is changes in our capital spending. This year, for the first time, we're also budgeting based on the city's strategic priorities in the strategic plan that was adopted in May of 2019. So this chart shows where that money is spent, city leadership and services. The biggest piece of that, which includes both our police budget and our contract with Issaquah Fire and Rescue, infrastructure investments close behind, and then spending in the areas of social and economic vitality, environmental stewardship, growth and development, mobility, and then 50% of our budget are transfers within our other funds, so do not equate to actual capital or operational spending. The general fund, which is the lion's share of the municipal services that we provide the day-to-day services, are reduced by $900,000 or 1.8%. So the general fund in total is $49 million. The largest pieces of that are the police department at $12 million, our Parks and Community Services department at $10 million, and our contract with Issaquah Fire and Rescue, $7.7 million. Again, the executive department, the clerk, city clerk, communications and human resources, community planning and development, finance, and the municipal court make up the remainder part of the general fund. This slide kind of gives you a sense of staffing changes from the pre-recession numbers through the 2010s. As you can see, back in 2009, we were at 278 staff members. That decreased significantly by the time we got to 2015-16. The adopted budget for this year, before any changes, was about 286 employees, and then the 2021 budget is reduced again to about 250 employees. So we have ebbed and flowed with that. The budget this year is eliminating 36 full-time positions, and as we talk about the proposed budget, it's going to be important to have some benchmarks with that. First and foremost is the budget that the City Council adopted for beginning January 1, 2020, and then there were reductions through the course of the year. When we look at staffing, in addition, when the budget was adopted for January 1, 2020, there were positions that were authorized but not funded. So many of those positions were eliminated with this budget for 2021, as well as positions that were eliminated earlier because of the COVID-19 crisis earlier in 2020. Personnel changes, this gives a little bit more detail to that. As you can see, we're proposing to restore on the left-hand side of that first box, restoring 2 positions in the city clerk's office, 4.5 positions at the police department, 2 positions in Parks and Community Services, and 1 position in community planning and development. We're eliminating 9 of those frozen positions that are listed there. And then there are several miscellaneous other changes which have a net impact of adding 1.5 positions to the budget. So what we tried to do, the mayor's goal for the 2021 budget was based on what we think were reasonable revenue projections to try to bring back as many municipal services that were cut because of the COVID-19 crisis. We're certainly not there completely, but as you'll hear during the presentation, there's some strategic areas that the mayor felt very strongly about. So the general fund highlights, we've been keeping the city council posted about our best estimates of the impact of the COVID-19 crisis. We are happy to report that revenues continue to trend upward from our original projections in April and May, and we also went to the council with revenue projections as recently as August. So the proposed revenues in the proposed budget are $3.2 million greater than the August forecast. However, we're still $3.1 million less revenue in the general fund compared to the 2020 adopted budget. The rest of the slide talks about some of those changes. Sales and business and operation tax continues to come back. The sales tax is on a multi-month lag, so we're trying to be as cautious with the sales tax numbers given that lag, but everything continues to trend well. We're looking at increases in our permit fees in our community planning and development department, changes in our jail contract fees, some adjustments to our cost allocations to reflect reality, so there's some reductions there. And then to draw down on a single line contingency fund that was put in the budget several years ago, $300,000. It's been the mayor's judgment, given what we've been going through, that it's appropriate to use those contingency funds, and that cost is directly related to the increases in expenses of our unemployment insurance payments because of the large number of layoffs earlier in the year. So the mayor's decided to use that $300,000 contingency. Sales tax, as our finance director, Beth Goldberg, described it last night to the city council, this is a Mr. Toad's wild ride. And as you can see, prior to the pandemic starting in March, we were having really a good process with our sales tax revenue. And let me just stop here for a moment. I think that we have a few other folks that have joined us. If you could just remind folks to be on mute so that there's not that feedback. Thank you very much. Up, went back. There you go. Thank you very much, sir. So on the sales tax side, we saw a very strong January, February. March dropped by 25%. It has been coming back slowly. We only have data through the month of July. We should be receiving August data by the end of October, and we will give the city council a revised revenue forecast for 2020 in early November. But as you can see, it's been quite a ride on the area of sales tax. Business and occupation tax. This is also something we continue to collect. We are feeling that this will still be within the realm of what we saw in 2020, but still, this is a changing, volatile piece. There are still folks out that have not paid their business and operations taxes, so this is something we continue to look at closely. As far as raising fees for services, I mentioned we're proposing changes in the jail fees. We contract for jail services with a number of King County communities who pay a per night rate for the use of the jail, and so we are looking to make increases there. We're also seeing increased use of the jail by these contract cities. So all that taken together, we estimate will be an additional $355,000 in revenue. Permit fees, the council earlier this year had a discussion about the balance of costs associated with our community planning and development department and the permit fees we charge. The council has set a goal of a 80% cost recovery. In order to do that, we are looking at a series of changes to our fees and charges there, and that would estimate additional revenue of about $1.1 million. We'll be coming back to the city council over the next few weeks with more details on that and the appropriate action to change those fees. The property tax in Washington State, under law, the council may raise the property tax levy up to 1% each year. That is based on a variety of different factors that need to be met. In most years, those factors are met. This year, we have estimated that rise in cost falls just shy of the what's known as the implicit price deflator. And so in order for the council to levy that 1% increase, the council will need to make findings through what's known as a substantial need ordinance. This next slide talks a little bit more about the implicit price deflator. I don't want to get into it too deeply here. If there are questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them later. But as you can see, there have been other years in the recent past where that deflator has been less than 1%, and the council has made those similar findings. So that will be an issue of discussion for the council in its budget deliberations. General fund expenditure priorities. Again, this chart shows the changes between the 2020 adopted budget and the proposed 2021 budget. This slide talks a little bit about 6 areas that Mayor Pauly felt very strongly about investments in. So as we looked at changes for the budget, we've looked at these 6 areas. The first is building the social safety net. Clearly, the impact of the COVID-19 crisis has had a great impact on individuals. The city has been very focused, Mayor Pauly has been very focused on issues of food and shelter. And we believe in order to deal with these challenges, we need to add 2 additional human services positions. Currently, we have 1 position within our Parks and Community Services Department. So we're looking to add 2 positions. One of those positions would be housed in the police department. We've learned a lot in the last several months about the needs of our police department and the amount of time that is spent dealing with human services issues above and beyond law enforcement or traditional crime issues. And so we hope that the addition of 1 human services position at the police department will help do that, to coordinate with nonprofits to link residents in need with those services. We're also looking to add a 2nd position within our Parks and Community Services Department, a manager position that would coordinate our response citywide, including the police department. So we're very excited about that. We're also looking at continuing the practice of allocating human services grants. Human Services Board comes to the council annually with grant allocations, and so that money would continue in 2021. Protecting public safety and police accountability. Again, the council spent quite a bit of time this summer in the wake of a lot of national discussion, community discussion regarding equity and diversity issues. We are making changes to the police department's staffing, adding 4.75 civilians to help us with our reporting, our data analysis, as we work to share that information with the public. We are also looking to add 1 police officer and 1 jail transport officer. Those 2 positions have been frozen for budget purposes this year. This will bring our police department staffing levels of sworn side to their lowest levels in 2017. And something that I think the council will be talking about over the next few weeks as it considers this budget is the impacts to the police department. There's concern that on the one hand, we be thoughtful of the number of sworn officers, but also make sure the community remains safe, and also continue to look at ways to civilianize the services that are provided at the police department where appropriate. And so Mayor Pauly, in this proposed budget, takes the first steps with that. Certainly, it's not meant to be the end of that evaluation process, but we believe this is a prudent step forward. This next slide shows some changes in staffing levels at police over time, over the last 10 years or so. And as you can see, those numbers have varied from a low of 61 to what's being proposed, 67.5 for 2021. The next area of priority for Mayor Pauly is investing in our parks and open space. As we look at the changes that have occurred this year with COVID-19, many people are finding themselves spending more time at home, taking advantage of our parks, our open space, our trails, and we want to make sure that we fund necessary resources there. So we're looking to restore funding for 2 parks maintenance officers. We are adding a new position known as a park ranger. This person would be responsible for looking after our parks, responding to calls for service if there are issues within our parks, not only our parks, but our open space and our trails. So we're excited about providing that extra level of service in our parks. Our traditional recreational programs continue to adjust based on COVID restrictions. The governor just yesterday announced some changes to those restrictions. So that part remains a little bit up in the air. We have been working on a wayfinding system for our parks and also would be used citywide, which was suspended. That project was suspended with the COVID-19 crisis. We're looking to move forward with that project in 2021. And then another main priority in this area for Mayor Pauly is the acquisition and capital investment in our parks and open space. And we've made some progress over the last couple of years, and it's our intent that we continue to do that moving forward. Next area is supporting community development. A big project that has been on the books for the last couple of years is updates to the Issaquah Municipal Code with Title 18. Title 18 is the land use portion of the code. And so that work continues. It was suspended earlier this year because of the COVID-19 crisis, so there is dollars budgeted to move forward with that. We're also looking to add 2 positions, a new position of an engineering manager to help us with the work that is done mostly on private development projects here in Issaquah to make sure those are attended to appropriately, and adding a senior planner position which has been frozen and funding that to move forward. Also looking at commitments to economic development and tourism-related businesses. The Lodging Tax Advisory Committee will be coming to the council in the next few weeks with its recommendations for additional spending during 2020 as well as 2021 to help those tourist-related businesses that have been very impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. Lastly, delivering city services. The city every other year does a citywide community survey, so there's funding in there for that. Additional resources to help with our audit and financial statement preparation. We made changes in our internal support services staff, and so we have some additional changes there. Looking to add a records analyst, or actually fund a records analyst position, which has been budgeted but not funded because of various budget issues. We continue to receive many, many requests from members of the public for city records through the Freedom of Information Act, and so it's important to have appropriate staffing to do that on a timely basis. And then to continue to provide support to our information technology department. They have been great to help us with our remote working, but there are still additional investments that will be needed. We're not sure when city staff will return to offices on a regular basis. Office-based staff largely works from home, and so we want to make sure that we have the technology to support that work moving forward. Fostering a positive and productive workplace. This talks a little bit about as we are looking to deal with coming back to the office. So there are some funds budgeted to help us sort through our existing facilities and make sure that we right-size them as people return to the office. We also have a continued focus on citywide equity and anti-bias training, so there's dollars budgeted to do that with our city staff. We have cost of living adjustments that are part of our collective bargaining agreement, so those are budgeted as well. And starting January 1, there'll be no furloughs for city employees, and then those employees that took a 7% salary reduction, that money would be restored starting January 1. So that gives you an overview, a high-level overview of our expenses and our revenues. Then there's the issue of what's known as our fund balance or our reserves. We look to have a fund balance in the 15 to 20% range. We are fortunately above that fund balance now, but as we look at expenditures increasing over time, we want to be thoughtful to make sure that revenues meet expenditures without dipping significantly into that fund balance. As you can see on this slide, we're anticipating at this point about a $200,000 dip into fund balance in order to balance the 2020 budget. It's proposed that we would take $2.3 million for 2021, and then additional dollars in 22 and beyond. The goal every year, of course, is to not have to rely on any fund balance. And so as those numbers creep up over time, that will need to be something that we look at. Mayor Pauly is very concerned about this, as is the full city council. And we hope to have additional discussions on how we can address this. Quite honestly, with the current situation and the current uncertainty with revenues, the mayor's proposing a small draw on fund balance this year for 2021, and then we will continue to look at those issues moving forward. Toward the bottom of the box, you'll notice ending fund balance divided into 2 categories, designated and undesignated. The mayor's proposing this year to create a designated portion of the fund balance to pay for accumulated leave costs. Longtime employees have vacation, sick leave, and compensatory time on the books, and in order to make sure that there's dollars allocated to pay that, the mayor is proposing a designation within the fund balance of $3 million. That number will reduce over time, but would be fixed at this point at $3 million. So as you can see, the undesignated fund balance proposed to be 20% in 2021, still above our recommended threshold. When you get into the out years, however, that continues to go down and becomes a level that would not be acceptable. So that would be issues that would need to be addressed in future years. Other budget highlights, we are working to create a single public works department. We've had a public works operations and public works engineering department over many years. Beginning next year, we'll have a single public works department. The incumbent department heads of both PWO and PWE have left during the course of 2020. And so there's an opportunity now to hire a single department director, which we'll be doing over the next few weeks. The pavement management program, making sure that we're investing in our existing road infrastructure. We put that on hold for 2020. That is back in the budget, so we're fully funding that pavement management program in 21. We are looking to continue to hold the utility rate steady for 21, as I mentioned before, and we're looking at allocating our costs of our fleet, all of our vehicles, in a more responsible way moving forward. And that is, as far as a longer-term issue goes, how we fund our fleet replacement is something that the mayor and the council remain concerned about, and something we will continue to address in future years. Sustainability, big part of what we do. We've made some changes there with the function being moved from a separate standalone office to under the executive department. We've also been working on an environmental board to replace the former Rivers and Streams board. And so that board, we are nearing completion with the council passing a new ordinance, creating the board hopefully in the next few weeks, and hopefully to have this board up and running by the first of next year. Capital budget, lots of investments still in capital budgets, despite the fact it's smaller. The signal at Southeast 43rd Place, the replacement of our online financial system known as Munis, the relocation of the downtown Issaquah fire station, all of that is budgeted moving forward for next year. Capital projects highlights, I will not read them all here on the slide, but a good mix of transportation projects, technology projects, parks and facility projects, and utility projects. So that's in half an hour or so an overview of where we are with the budget. Certainly, we would encourage everyone to go to our website, issaquah.gov, to get a full copy of the budget. The council will be considering ordinances for the property tax and planning and development fees, as well as a budget and salary ordinance. So those are the specific actions that the council will be taking over the next several weeks. Back to the schedule, the council plans to talk about the budget on the 13th of October next week, public hearing on the budget on the 19th, deliberations on October 27th, considering the property tax levy on November 2nd, final deliberations on November 5th, and then budget adoption on November 16th. So thank you for those of you who have tuned in this evening, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and happy to open it up to questions. I think we've only added one participant since we started, so I know that Phil and Connie are familiar with the process here, and Mr. Gintzner, welcome. If you have questions or comments, I guess the group is small enough. If you just want to raise your hand, I'll be happy to call on you. Mayor Pauly, before we do that, do you have any closing thoughts or comments on the presentation?
It's a lot of information to digest. I don't think municipal government finances are easy to understand, but I think you did a very good job in putting it into buckets that's a little more understandable. So questions, can be very, very detailed and not on something that you saw if there's something that we didn't miss. But I thought the high-level overview was very well done, Wally. Thanks.
So with that, any questions? Ms. Marsh, can you take yourself off mute, please?
Well, I've read the budget, so my questions. I'll start with questions. I do have comments on budget format because I've read the budget for the last 20 years, and so it's always interesting to see those changes. I don't know if you want those here. So, the ranger, Dave Kapler, I called him up and said, "Park ranger, what?" And he said, "Well," and he has hopes and dreams for this park ranger. So could someone explain? The park ranger gets up in the morning and goes to work, and then what happens?
Mm-hmm. So this would be a first for Issaquah, but not a first for other communities. And so what we've tried to do is look at how other communities use a park ranger. We anticipate that they would be responsible for a regular circuit of all of our parks, trails, and open space, kind of just to check in. They would also respond to calls for service, either received through 911 or received through other ways, through council members, through our general city question and complaint line, and be responsible for checking those out. The position would not work 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. The position would work largely Wednesday through Sunday. So we want to make sure that this position is active and available times when the properties are being used. So there would absolutely be a Saturday and Sunday component to the park rangers week. You know, in my experience, I've worked in 2 communities where they've had park rangers, and I think it's the mix of, you know, the checking in versus the active work. It can vary by season, vary by week. And so I think we're going to wait and see how that happens. But really the goal here is to make sure that our parks, trails, and open space are clean, available, safe for our residents. And if there are issues that are impacting cleanliness, safety, or other usability, that the park ranger would take ownership and be responsible for that.
Okay, so basic things, because we're used to our state parks rangers that they're qualified and they carry a gun. Is that this kind of a park ranger?
No gun.
No gun. Okay.
They're going to have a radio. And they will have a
radio.
They'll have a radio and a uniform. The idea here also kind of comes from the work we've done on police accountability. And, you know, the mayor very much wanted to look at, you know, what ways can we have people perform tasks that don't require a badge and a gun. And, you know, keeping an eye on our parks may have a badge. I don't think we figured that out yet, but they certainly will have a uniform. They'll have a radio. They'll have a marked vehicle, so that when that person is on the scene, you will know they are not a police officer. You will know they're not a public works employee. You'll know they're a park ranger.
Okay, so I think there's Connie, a lot to make that.
Can I add to that as well, Connie?
What's that?
Can I add to that as well?
Yeah.
For me, I think it's about making sure that there are eyes on our public spaces. And I don't necessarily think the way to do that is to add more police officers. I think the way to do that is to make sure that trails and parks that are accessible have somebody on foot or bike or in a vehicle that is making sure that anybody who's using those feels like there are eyes on them. And you know, a couple of examples are even the King County trails that we consider to be complementary to our transportation system. Well, if you know that nobody is on this long, lengthy piece of trail ever at, you know, it just doesn't feel the same. And I want to make sure that our community actually feels safe and comfortable on the entire trail system, because we are counting on more people biking and walking, all the rest of it, but we have to make sure we have eyes on it too.
Okay, so of course I have more questions, but you guys jump in if you have questions, because does that mean
Phil?
nobody else has a question?
Phil looks like he has a question. Still muted, Phil. There you go.
There we go. Connie, we want to hear your questions. However, I did have one, which will reveal my stupidity, but it is a question that I do have. And that is that there was nothing mentioned about schools. Is that because the school district encompasses areas outside of the city?
Phil,
Yeah,
that's a great question. It causes a ton of confusion. Sorry, Wally. The school district's a separate governing agency. They cover, oh my gosh, I don't know the geography, but many more square miles and cities and even rural areas compared to the city. So we work on partnership and things, but they are a separately elected agency. And that's not an ignorant question. That's a great question.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's really all I wanted to ask at this point.
thank you. Mr. Ginsener, it's a small group, so do you have any questions or comments?
No, I appreciate the transparency and the complexities that are going into the process here. So I'm just looking for general knowledge and understanding of what direction the city's going in. Get back to that park ranger, though. One thing that I think it may sound small, but I think it's important that a park ranger could be doing is sometimes there's park facilities that are overrun with trash, or maybe somebody's gone out there, some kids have left a bunch of beer bottles, or something like that has happened, or there's a problem with a restroom. I think if you have somebody that's more constantly in touch with those types of physical realities of what's happening in a park or trail, it could be very helpful to quicken the pace of getting them resolved.
TJ, I think that's excellent. Sorry, Wally, I keep cutting you off, but I love
That's okay, I'll be quiet.
TJ, I think that's excellent because we schedule our maintenance on a schedule. So our crews will go and check the trash cans in the bathroom every so often. And this actually gives us another set of eyes out there all the time, which may be able to draw attention to those issues faster. So I totally agree with you. I think this is really good. I also wanted to let you know, though, I'm not sure if it came up in the budget or not, how specific Wally got, but we are also adding back a couple of parks maintenance positions. Parks has typically been in the city an underfunded area of service. And the parks are, in this time of COVID, getting a lot more use, and I'm hoping it will increase as we move through phases and larger groups can gather. And so we've added several resources in parks at this time.
Connie, do you have other questions?
Don't you know it? So think of me as Dave Kapler right now, and I'm long and I'm lean and I'm wearing 2 pairs of suspenders. His dream, don't snort.
Adam, tell me you're recording this so I can show it back to Dave.
Oh, they are recording it. Dave's going to hear it. So his idea of a park ranger is a park ranger would also employ a grouping of citizens who regularly use particular areas that she could expand the coverage of the territory by seeing what's happening, and they call him, her, and say, here's an issue here. And so you could also use him as sort of a beginning of a volunteer base for geographic areas of parks. And then his hopes and dreams expand beyond there grandiosely. He can tell you all about that in vivid detail, I'm sure.
I'm sure he will. I'm surprised he hasn't knocked on my door tonight to fill me all. So moving away from a single position, but almost in the same spirit, what we have for our maintenance of our mitigations and a lot of our projects is we have all this professional service contracts that we use in order to do our weeding and preserve our environment. Yet super hard to follow professional services in this budget and understand how they are going to use. So I cannot get a grip on something like, are we going to have a Forterra contract?
because we talked about that whole tree thing. And so then there were some theories on how much money we would want to have for that Forterra contract. So I would, in a supplemental form, I would like to understand the professional contracts we have and in general what they do, because I think the idea of, do we want employees, which are expensive, or do we want professional contracts, which may or may not be as efficient, is an important consideration in the budget. And that was missing. The mobility work plan that we just sort of got done looking at from the mobility master plan was also invisible in here. I was not able to understand the emphasis points toward what that mobility master plan said we were aiming for. I just couldn't see it. And so when you have your 5 points, your 5 points don't really echo the strategic plan points. And I thought we had the strategic plan in order to be disciplined and try to adhere and prioritize to our strategic plan. One of those is transportation. So it seemed very strange to me that we didn't have a transportation emphasis, at least describing where we thought we were going and how we were putting that money toward one of the number one community concerns of the past. Right now, you know, nobody gets on a bus in theory, nobody's really in their car, though transportation is creeping up again. So that seemed awkward to me. And so that I guess is a comment on something that I was not preferred to me in this budget, because it wasn't clear. And then the workload in the budget was interesting because you showed the work plans and then there was a series of different descriptions of sometimes work plan items, sometimes other things, and the costs sort of washed around. So I read a lot of pages and I kept going back and looking for the matching numbers for everything. And I went to the CIP. I couldn't find them because they weren't CIP things. They were work plan things. And so I spent a lot of time flipping pages and I felt unsatisfied because I could not get a clear picture of the budget. So between not following the strategic plan structure and not being disciplined in tracking everything you said so that I could understand where it was going, I had to drink a lot of coffee and I swore a little bit when I was reading the budget. I almost encouraged the dog to eat my phone, as a matter of fact, but that's expensive, so I didn't do it.
Wait, Winnie, before you move on, let's talk about that for a second.
Okay.
I think one of the things that's been super disappointing for me is that the change in our circumstances in terms of a pandemic and economic upheaval and whatever else is going on is that we ought to structure the budget around the strategic plan, and we ought to have revenues that are allocated to move the needle on some of those goals. The reality is there's very little movement this year. It doesn't mean the budget shouldn't be structured that way. But for example, in transportation, many of the items in transportation significantly rely on us finding a funding source for it. Well, we're not going to talk about that this year. We're not going to go out to the voters and talk about that. We also promised the council performance metrics on the strategic plan. And the council did have a good conversation about the metrics they want. And the budget should show that. I mean, it should. This year, what you're seeing is a budget that shows very little movement and progress. And I agree with you that we could probably take more steps to tie it in line with the strategic plan as well. So we have more work to do. I don't believe in the evolution of our budget formats that we're at the end of it. But I think next year's budget, because we will have metrics and start to measure them, will give the council and interested public the ability to see if those expenditures in those areas are actually moving the needle on the things that people say that are important. But it's not in there this year. It just isn't.
So Mayor, if I can just add a few things. The performance plan will be part of the adopted budget. So the council will come back, I believe it's on November 2nd, to review that performance plan. So that will be included as far as the adopted budget. The work plan, I think, is a fair point. We can have a attachment with the work plan that has the budget dollars there. So that I think, as we are evolving this budget to focus more on the strategic plan and the work plan is pieces there. As I mentioned, we do have aggregate dollars by the strategic plan, and so that's the next step in our budgeting process. We can do more in the future to be even more detailed than that. Part of the problem is that many members of the community then ask, where's the police budget? And so they would not think to look at the city services as part of that. So that we're also having to build bridges from the operational side, which in some cases the strategic plan did not address all of the operational issues we do. Public safety.
Yeah, public safety wasn't in it, right?
Isn't in it. So that's $20 million out of $50 million that's not covered in the strategic plan. So
yeah.
So thank you for those comments. We'll include the work plan structure that'll be provided to the council and the community, and it'll be part of the adopted budget.
Connie.
You're on mute, Connie.
Connie, you have to put $1 in the jar because you didn't take yourself off mute.
No, you can have a tape measure. You don't get $1.
We have hundreds of dollars in the jar right now for all the time.
I thought I was still unmuted. So, I think that having to link things to the strategic plan is hard and awkward. So I wouldn't mind if you said you weren't going to do it and figured out another way to do the linkage. It just, if that was the intent, then we need to figure it out, because who knew we were going to have a pandemic, right? And then you have this whole conversation about the police, which wasn't part of the strategic plan. Mm-hmm. And so then nobody ever had a conversation about, they said, well, things are going to change. Yes. Okay. But there was never a conversation about what do we do when they change, and then how do we gracefully include those changes in something like a budget systematically. So it's the same way every time. We know things are going to change. So how are we going to address that every time? So every time I open a budget, which is going to be every year, then there's a structure that's the same. Instead of every year, I have to adopt a new structure and try to figure out what you're talking about. Because I've been adopting a new structure every 3 years for the last 20 years, right? It is a challenge. It's interesting, but I would like to see. Anyway, so I'm not all that frustrated because it's a terrible year for trying to do these things. Okay, so now remote meetings for the public. You're saying that you're going there, but I'm here to tell you that this format would be okay, but at a council meeting, when you don't have a picture of a person, all you have is a disembodied voice, that is not enough for public representation. And I had thought we were trying to figure out a way to buy a component so that the community could actually attend the meeting, as compared to either just talking at the beginning and then sitting nowhere. You can't even be present, right? And I would like to see that included in this budget. It's small, right? You're talking $5,000 and $10,000. I hear there's a barrier with security. Other people have seemed to have done it, and we are still not, and I haven't heard any progress about that one. So then on to the decisions that you have made in order to try to make this a workable budget. I agree that you have to put a contingency for people that retire. I agree with dipping a little bit into the ending fund balance this year. I don't agree that we can sustain that over time. And when I see those future numbers eroding the ending fund balance with sort of a, what do we do? That makes me really nervous. So if I were a council member, which I'm not, I would like to understand how throughout next year you are going to come back quarterly and give us that progress and in advance, like you guys did this year. You did great with managing your staff and cutting back, so we didn't have a $10 million deficit. But we may need to do that again if we look like we're going to cut into the ending fund balance over and over and over. So,
okay, can I add some stuff here? Because
Please.
this is a really good story. I wish we could only deal with one thing at a time. And 7 years ago, the one thing we should have been dealing with was our structural deficit. The structural deficit is that most of our state revenues do not grow at the same pace as our expenditures. And Finance Director Diane Marcotte made it very clear to council that sometime around 2021, you're going to cross over and you will then no longer be collecting enough money to pay your bills just to maintain the service you have. So the $2 million this year, that's a one-off. That's just, you know, we could have been $10 million in the hole. Whew, we're only $2 million in the hole. The second big part to the story is that I believe, I wasn't in the administration, so I'm just kind of spitballing here, but I believe for the years that I was on council, budgets were established in a way that were super aggressive. So we're going to spend $150 million in 12 months. Maybe you'll give us a few new positions and maybe you won't. The reality was we didn't spend it. And the overage kept going into the ending fund balance. And between that ambitious budgeting and the strength of sales tax, it took the structural deficit off of council's radar. So they're kind of like, I don't know what the problem is. Every year we end up with more money than we used to have. So I don't really know why we have to talk about our structural deficit. Well, the confluence of an economic collapse and the structural deficit coincide now. So I'm very grateful to the strong management of Wally and Beth in minimizing the impact this year. It has been painful to do that. We lost 23 very, very good staff members who were doing great work for the community, but it kept us down to only having to go in 2 million. What you're seeing in those outer years is not necessarily a bad economy, a continuation of bad economy. It's us seeing what Finance Director Marcotte told us was coming. If the city council does not decide to look at a revenue stream for transportation projects and a revenue stream for parks and open space projects, we will not execute on those capital plans that we have for either of them. That's why there are only a few projects in the transportation one this year. This city council passed the transportation benefit district. I think that's a wonderful idea. Is this the right time to go out and ask for a sales tax increase to do capital projects? It is not. And so the conversation we're going to be having with council all through next year, for the next 4 years, is the structural deficit is here. It's here to stay. And the state isn't anytime soon upping our revenues. And so the only thing you can do is cut expenditures or find revenue sources for those big things that you want to do and the community has asked for and you can't afford. So it's sort of those two things laying over top of each other. And I'm sorry if that hasn't been clear to the community. I think having a local paper and being able to explain more things would be helpful. But yeah, the structural deficit, very, very scary. And it is not just the city of Issaquah, it's the city of Tukwila, it's the city of Kent, it's the city of Auburn. It is the 1% tax cap. It is the state not sharing the shared revenues from marijuana retail sales tax. It's all kinds of things. But basically, we have more expenditure. We have the rate of growth on cost of living for expenditures far exceeds the revenue side. And everybody's going to have a coming to Jesus, pardon my language, moment, all cities in the next few years.
And Madam Mayor, at this point, it's 7 o'clock. I know you needed to leave us at 7 o'clock. Okay. Unless Phil, I don't know if you have any other questions, and I'm not sure how many more Connie has. We've lost one.
Kathy's on that too.
And Kathy McCory from the Greater Issaquah Chamber of Commerce is with us. So Connie, I'm not sure how much more you had.
Well, I do have one thing.
Oh, great, Phil, go ahead.
And this is for all of us who are left, all 6 of us. And that is that possibly some money may be spent by the city to acquaint people with a new method of communication, so that instead of 6, you can have maybe 50 or 60 people in on a discussion of budget. This is a new age, and we have to deal with a new reality, and communication is the most important part. So there may not be any money in there officially for educating the public on communication, but instead of me being 1/6 of the audience, I'd rather be 1/60.
Good point, Phil. Thank you. I also actually wanted to give Connie one more little touch on the structural deficit. I have talked to council leadership about forming a financial ad hoc committee and having them focus on it. That this is a problem that needs to be solved, and it needs to be daylighted, and it needs some creative solutions. So they had one before to try and figure out whether or not we should do a transportation benefit district. They should have one again, because here we are, 2021. Diane was exactly right. It's the crossover year.
Yeah, ad hoc meetings don't get a public overview, which makes me crazy, as you know. No.
Yes, but they need to bring those questions to council and have the body talk about it.
They do. Now, I understand that the finance director is looking forward to getting a better 6-year forecast, and that would be awesome. One thing that I didn't see in this budget is a discussion of granting world. It seems like it's sort of half crashed. And so I don't know if you're getting granting ability from some things like the CARES Act, but I have no idea how the structure in the county is going for transportation, and state and federal for transportation granting, parks and all of that stuff. It would be interesting.
That might be
have
something
a conversation about that.
Yeah, I think that's something Beth could pull out. We have some expectations of grants that we've applied for. I don't think it's crashed as much as you might think it's crashed. So, and I'm going to check out Phil. Very nice to meet you. Kathy, why don't you have your camera on? Connie, I hope there's not 100 more questions. So you guys are at least done in the next hour. But thank you for your questions, Connie. You know I'm teasing you. I think it's great. And I think other citizens who get to come and listen to you ask your questions learn a lot. So peace out.
All right.
Thank you, Autumn. Thank you, Wally.
Thanks, Mayor Pauly. Any other
that
questions?
That was actually the end of my questions. So.
Oh, my goodness. Kathy, we're a relatively small group this evening. Did you have any specific questions?
Thank you, Wally. No, I didn't. I just thought I'd listen in and see how everything's going.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. Unless there's any other questions, I'll just simply say thank you to those who joined us this evening. Thank you to Autumn for helping out on the technology. There's multiple opportunities for members of the public to continue to this dialogue with the City Council. There's, as I mentioned, several meetings coming up between now and Thanksgiving. So if there's individuals who are watching the recording of this would like to participate, please go out to our website at issaquah.gov and you'll find all the information to do that. Again, thanks to all of you who joined us this evening, and have a good night.